Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. I teach at the University of Colorado Boulder, previously at UC Berkeley and UCLA. In talking about Norse myth, it's important to keep in mind our medieval sources, and I'm always emphasizing the importance of the prose Edda and the poetic Edda. But of course, there is the problem that these books are written down in the 1200s. And so some people are very reluctant to accept their evidence of what Norse myth and religion might have once been like before Christianity, considering that Iceland converted to Christianity in 1000. That is the equivalent, as I'm speaking today in 2018, of course, trying to reconstruct perhaps a religion and system of beliefs that existed before 1748. Of course, 1748, the most interesting fact I can find about that is the year of the birth of Martha Jefferson, wife of Thomas Jefferson. However, we are reasonably confident that the Eddas reflect an older layer of belief, and at any rate, we don't have anything else much to go by. I'd rather go by something written in the 1200s than something written in the 1800s or 1900s for sure. Also, there is reason to believe that the poems in the Poetic Edda especially, at least many of them, actually were composed originally before the conversion to Christianity, as some of them have very archaic linguistic features. What I want to talk about in this video is evidence that actually does physically survive from the Viking Age before Christianity came to Scandinavia. Well, for one thing, we have the Gotland picture stones from Gotland, the island off of the east coast of Sweden, long a place of many independent traditions. The Gotland picture stones include the famous Ardre VIII. This is from the 700s or 800s. Here is the whole stone. I'll show you a picture. And then here is the very top of it, which appears to depict a man on an 8-legged horse. Odin is said to ride an 8-legged horse, Sleipnir in the Eddas. It also seems to show a scene of sacrifice with at least 3 people being hung, and then one person who seems to have maybe fallen off of the gallows. Human sacrifice was made to Odin by hanging, according to the Gatrek saga, in which a man is sacrificed to Odin by hanging, and of course in Hofmal, Odin himself says that he hung on Yggdrasil and sacrificed to himself. Also, if we believe Adam of Bremen's account of a Norse temple, hanging was used for human sacrifices there in Uppsala in the 1070s or so. Another important picture stone, also from Gotland, is the Hjangvida picture stone. This is from near Ljugarn. It is from the 900s probably. You can see at the top of this stone, there is also a depiction of someone riding an 8-legged horse. This is probably, again, Odin, based on evidence from the Eddas. It seems that perhaps he is entering Valhall after being away. There seems to be a woman offering him, perhaps a Valkyrie, offering him a drinking horn. Maybe another Valkyrie is the person who's flying above him. And then there are people fighting, as we would expect men to be doing in Valhall, as well as perhaps one of Odin's wolves in the bottom left corner. Although animals are never depicted quite as realistically as we might like in art on these stones. Another interesting picture stone is, it's actually a rune stone. This is U1161 from Altuna. This is probably from the 1000s. This depicts Thor, apparently, he's got his hammer in his hand, fishing for the Midgard serpent. Now, this tale is told in the Poetic Edda and the poem Himiskvida, and also by Snorri in the Prose Edda. And in the Prose Edda by Snorri, Snorri says, again, this is written in the 1200s, that Thor, when he fished for the Midgard serpent, struggled so hard against the fishing line that his foot bust out of the bottom of the boat. That seems to be happening here. We also know from Himiskvida and from Snorri's Prose Edda that Thor fished with a steerhead as bait, and this appears to be a steerhead being used to bait the serpent here. So many details consistent with what the Eddas say in the 1200s, but from a stone carved in the 1000s. There are also several stones that actually do mention Thor by name, often in the formula Thor Vigi, may Thor bless. Here's an example of that from the runestone VG 150 from Vallanda, Sweden. This stone is dated to about the year 1000. There's also this very interesting stone. This is DR 220 from Sonder Kirkeby in Denmark. This is from the 960s probably. It's a memorial stone for a man named Oskutter, set up by his brother. And it includes at the very top some disguised runes. The words Thor Vigi Runar, Thor bless the runes, are written together as almost sort of symbols, probably to disguise their meaning in a country that was becoming more Christian. At any rate, these stones that mention Thor bless or Thor bless the runes speak to a persistent belief in Thor in late pagan Scandinavia. There's also the very interesting human skull fragment from Ribe, Denmark. This is probably carved in the mid-700s. The runes read, Wolf and Odin and High Tyr help Bor against this pain and this dwarf sword, Bor. He restates his name, maybe like you would do if you were leaving a voicemail for someone. Now that's Jackson Crawford, something like that. This, of course, attests to Odin, that god, in the 700s, 500 years before the Eddas are written, as well as Tyr, called High Tyr, perhaps worship of a wolf or someone named Ulr at any rate. And the thing about the dwarf sword, this may reflect a folk belief that illnesses and pains are caused by dwarves or elves. We also see that in Old English. This is perhaps a remnant of some kind of sympathetic magic, where if you wear a piece of skull around your neck, notice there's a little hole for wearing this perhaps on a string. This might help your own headache. We also read in some sagas, the sagas are also typically written in the 1200s, 1300s in Iceland, about people carrying small likenesses of gods in their pockets or in bags. In the saga of Hallfred Troubleskald, in chapter 6, Hallfred, who has reluctantly converted to Christianity, is accused by another man of carrying such a likeness of Thor. Well, we actually do find likenesses of the gods that are small enough to be carried in a pocket or bag, such as this likeness, probably of Thor, found near Akureyri in Iceland, probably dated to about the year 1000. There's also this likeness that is probably of the god Frøy, of the god associated with agriculture, one of the Vanir gods. This is from near Rallinge, Sweden, probably from about the 1000s. The large phallus of Frøy is something that we associate with him as a fertility-related figure. And Adam of Bremen, in describing the Norse temple at Uppsala, mentions a god he calls Fricko, which is probably Freyr, as having a large phallus in the likeness in the temple there. We also find many examples of Thor's hammers designed to be worn as pendants. Here is a typical example. This is a reproduction by Grimfrost of a hammer found in Old Kirkeby in Denmark, in Bornholm. Hundreds of hammers like this are found. There's also this one, another Grimfrost reproduction. This is a reproduction of a hammer found in Skåne, probably from about the year 1000 also. There's also this unusual hammer found in Iceland, in the Hrunamannahreppur area. This is also probably from about 1000. This is believed to be a hammer, but it does have crucifix-like features. There are also depictions of Valkyries in art from the Viking Age. Here are two Valkyries, women carrying shields, and one of them on a horse. This is found near Tise, Denmark, dates from the 900s. This one from Denmark from near Galgebakken is from the 800s. Then there is this recent one found near Horby in Denmark. This is from about 800. And this one from Sweden dates to about the 900s. All right. So those are some physical remains that speak to worship of figures who seem to have had quite a bit in common with the figures mentioned in the Eddas. But there's also another layer of evidence, which is place names in Scandinavia. These place names often date to the Viking Age and often do mention the gods. What's interesting is that the picture that we get from those place names is often very different from the picture that we get of the gods painted in the Eddas. For example, Odin is depicted as the chief god in the Eddas, but he is not big in place names. There are no place names based on Odin in Iceland, and only a few in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. However, there are, of course, thousands of places named after Thor. That jives with what we know about him being the most popular god, both in the Eddas and based on the fact that Thor's hammer is the amulet of choice rather than something associated with Odin. Of course, another kind of interesting thing is we find many place names associated with a god named Ullr, or Ulin. This is very frequent in Norway and Sweden, often close to places named for the Vanir gods, Njordr and Freyr. Ullr must have been very important, but he is almost unmentioned in the Eddas, except for a A couple brief mentions of the Poetic Edda. Someone swears an oath on a ring of Ullr. In Grímnismál, Odin talks about Ullr having a place where he lives called Udalr. And then in the Prose Edda, Snorri says that he's associated with winter. Like in Colorado, there's even the Breck Ullr Fest, and there's something similar in Jackson, Wyoming, I believe. But almost unknown in the Eddas, but obviously very important during the Viking Age. So the Eddas clearly can't tell us everything. It's interesting to note that some of the gods' names and place names are very restricted to a particular area. For instance, Tyr, common in Denmark and southern Norway and Sweden, often association with places named for Vanir gods like Njordr, but not well known north of the very southern ends of Norway and Sweden. There's also 0 places named for Loki, which isn't too surprising, but also 0 places named for Heimdallr, who we would think would be more important than that based on his position in the Eddas. Now I'll close with just a quick remark about dating the poems in the Poetic Edda. Some of the poems have linguistic features that make us think they were probably composed very early, perhaps in the 800s, but the 2 that we're most secure about in that way are not about the gods. They're 2 poems about Volsung heroes, Atlakvida and Hamnismál. Some of the poems about the gods do have linguistic features that look more archaic than the 1200s, but not quite 800s, so perhaps 900s. Hávamál, maybe not all of it. Parts of Odin's love device may not be that old. Vafþrúðnismál, Ríkstula, Þrymskvida, Lokasenna, and then the 3 poems about young Sigurd, Regnsmál, Folktismál, and Sigurdrífamál, all have different kinds of linguistic archaisms that make us think they're quite a bit older than the manuscripts they're written on. One of the particular things that we look for, or certainly I credit this linguistic dating criterion, is there is a change of VR at the beginning of words to R in West Norse, which includes Icelandic and most Norwegian dialects. Of course, the Poetic Edda is in Old Icelandic. We see many places in these poems in the Poetic Edda where there is alliteration that demands a V, but the word is written with an R in the manuscript from the 1200s. So for instance, Þrymskvida stanza 1, which says, Reiðr var þó vingþór hann vaknaði. Thor was mad when he woke up. His name has even been adjusted to alliterate with V. The composer of the poem has added Ving so that Thor will alliterate with V, but there needs to be another V here to make a good poetic line, and we know that Reiðr was once Freyðr. So this change appears to have happened probably in the early 1000s in West Norse, so that helps us date Þrymskvida probably to the 900s. We see the same word in Lokasenna, stanza 15, Vega þú gak ef þú reiðr ser, that Reiðr would alliterate with Vega if it were Freyðr. Similarly with the word Reka in Hávamál, stanza 32, and at firði rekask, they fight at a feast. We would expect firði vrekask to get good alliteration, and the word was once vreka. This is cognate with English rek, which of course starts with that W. And the same in Vafþrúðnismál, stanza 53, Þessmun vidar reka. That would Vidar will avenge this. That would have good alliteration if it were Þessmun vidar vreka, and the word we know was once vreka. So the Eddas written down in the 1200s, but they do seem to be in line with what we see in the archaeological record of the Viking Age before Scandinavia was largely made Christian, and many of the poems do have linguistic features that make us think they are older than the vellum they're written on, including this change of VR to R, which is not reflected in the way that the poems alliterate, but you would think that it would be if those poems had been composed around the time they were written down in the 1200s in an Iceland that had been Christian for, yes, more than 250 years by the time the Poetic Edda manuscript, the Codex Regius, was written down. Well, I hope this has been somewhat informative for you, and for now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm going to wish you all the best.